is Sir Keir Starmer's launch of 5 national missions. And he joins us now from Salford. Sir Keir, good morning.
Good morning.
3 things I'd like to do with you, if possible, in the time we've got. First, understand a bit more about the thinking behind your speech today. Second, scrutinise the evolution of that thinking. And then third, maybe get some views on some of the other issues in the news. Are you feeling amenable?
That all sounds good. Thank you very much.
Great. Right. We've outlined already in the news bulletin your 5 priority areas. And you say this is about a whole new way of governing. We've heard that before many times. Why is this time different?
Well, what I'm setting out today, as you've said, is what we're going to do in government. So that is the mission, the 5 missions, to give us focus, to give us purpose and to give us drive. But alongside the what is also the how are you going to do this? What does a mission-driven government look like? Why is that different? And in terms of the thinking behind it, I think the best way I can express it is this, that I think for many people, there's a general sense that things are just not working, people aren't better off, and that we go round and round in circles. And 2 quick examples of that. We have had now for the last 13 years a NHS winter crisis. And every year it gets worse. Every year we just about get through. There's a sticking plaster that gets us into the summer. We just about survive. And we breathe for a bit in the summer and then we go back into another winter crisis. And we never fix the fundamentals. And we will go round and round like this forever if we don't fix the fundamentals. Another example, just to go somewhere else, is obviously with energy prices, we've suggested there should be an energy price freeze paid for by a windfall tax. But we can't go round and round doing that over and over again. We need a longer term solution. So the missions are about saying, yes, we recognise that a government has to answer the question, what are you going to do now, this winter for the NHS, this spring for energy prices? But what's the long-term fixing the fundamentals that gives a country that sense of purpose? I feel we've been in a sort of crouched position as a country for many years.
And on the windfall tax, thank you. And on the windfall tax, that is a specific policy. But the thing about this document is that it is extraordinarily reticent about detail. I mean, talk is cheap. It's very easy to say, as you do, you want the highest sustained growth in the G7. I mean, who doesn't? But you don't actually say how you're going to do it. You said a moment ago that you get into how you're going to do it. You don't at all in the document. There's nothing whatsoever about how you're going to achieve that.
Well, just on that, firstly, the mission needs to be ambitious. It needs to...
Obviously, everyone who wants to be Prime Minister is going to say we've got to be ambitious as a country. I mean, that's literally verbiage.
No, it absolutely isn't. If you take missions, let's take that first one, the highest sustained growth in the G7. That is going to be tough. There's nobody's going to say that's vague. That's
but how are you going to do
something that's easily achievable. Just let me finish on the missions, and I'll come straight to your point. An NHS actually fit for the future. So not just to get through this winter, but for the next 75 years. Safe streets, removing the barriers to opportunity for every child everywhere, and then a clean energy superpower, which means, clean electricity by 2030. Again, that's a sharp intake of breath. That's when I talk to CEOs and others about this, they say, that's going to be going some, Keir. So the missions are not vague. They are very clear. They're ambitious. To take on your challenge, what sits underneath these missions are the specifics. What then are you going to do to get this to happen? And so we have the specific, the columns, if you like, that hold the missions up. And then what I'm going to set out this morning in my speech is then what are the first steps along the journey, so you can see the tangible steps. So these reflect a lot of hard thinking, as I've talked to various people across the country about what the real problems are.
Understood.
A sense of the how we fix it, but then a programme of action, including those first specific steps. But just to take your challenge head on, all I ever have had in the last 3 years as Labour leader is, what are you going to do about here and now? I'm not interested in the long term. If we don't train more doctors for the NHS, we will be in the same cycle for a very, very long time. And it's time somebody rolled their sleeves up and said, we're going to fix the fundamentals.
Understood. I was trying to avoid a situation where you had to list your 5 priorities, because I did say at the beginning that we've already got them in the news bulletin. But that's okay. You've successfully used up a bit more time, so I'm going to get slightly more interrupty henceforth. Okay. Now, as a decorated lawyer, I do wonder if you should be a bit worried about crimes against the English language, because we spent the witching hours reading this work, and Hemingway, it ain't. At the bottom of page 4, under the heading Organising Government Around a Shared Vision, you write, this could mean new structures and ways of working to facilitate collaboration, including replacing some of the cabinet committees with new delivery-focused, cross-cutting mission boards. Who's going to vote for that?
Well, I'll tell you what people will vote for. They'll vote for someone.
No. Tell me who's going to vote for that.
Someone who wants.
And what does it mean?
Someone who wants the problems fixed. Let me give it. And I know you don't like the language, but look, I ran the prosecution service for 5 years. I know that amongst the problems I had was that it was in a silo. If you want to reduce crime, you have to get to grips with your education system. You have to recognise the mental health element to it. You have to recognise the health element to it. You have to recognise that the single biggest indicator of whether someone's going to end up in prison is whether they had difficulties at primary school and whether they were excluded at secondary school. To get to the bottom of that problem, you've got to have cross-cutting. You may not like the word cross-cutting, but I tell you what, everybody I've spoken to in the streets where they are, they say, Keir, if you've got a way of actually reducing crime where I live, then I'm up for a discussion about that. And me pretending that, oh, well, because of the language, we better not do it. It's a bit difficult to explain. It's a bit complicated.
No, it's not just that. We just want to understand. We just want to understand what you mean.
I've sat in the back of magistrates' courts watching the same process go round year after year after year. I want to break that.
Okay, let's move on.
If somebody wants to, change the language, albeit, but the determination, the drive and passion I have to actually change and fix the fundamentals is huge. I'm not going to be knocked off course by people saying, well, I don't like a particular word. It's the idea that matters.
No, it's not the word. I read the whole document. But let's move on to your leadership more broadly, if I may. You said you want to restore trust in politics. Why should people trust you when you've abandoned so many of the pledges that you made in your leadership campaign?
These missions...
No. The pledges you made when you ran to be Labour leader in 2019.
Why should anyone trust these missions? These missions come out of a discussion that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years across the country.
I'm so sorry. You just answered the question by asking a new question. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. The question I asked was about why people should trust you given you've abandoned so many of the pledges that you made when you ran to be Labour leader in 2019. It's not about these missions. We talked a bit about that. You abandoned many of the pledges you made when you ran for leader. So why should people trust you?
Well, look, so far as the pledges when I ran for leader are concerned, they are important statements of value and principle. And they haven't all been abandoned by any stretch of the imagination. But what I've had to do is obviously adapt some of them to the circumstances we find ourselves in. Since I ran for leader, we've had COVID. Since I ran for leader, we've had the conflict in Ukraine. Since I ran for leader, we've had a government that's done huge damage to our economy. Everybody recognises that. What these missions are the bringing together of the fundamental problems we face as a country, some hard thinking about how we have the long-time solutions to those problems. And, not many people disagree with these missions. What they want to know is, how are you going to achieve it? How are you going to bring about real change in my life? Because people are desperate for change. Go around the country. People desperately want change. They know things could be better. They know we've got huge talent and ambition in this country that is not being realised. There's that desperate yearning for change. And what we're putting forward with the missions is a programme to put that change into effect with a purpose-driven, mission-driven Labour government.
Can we just clarify a few points? You said that those pledges were statements of value. It's not really what a pledge is. A pledge is a solemn promise that's meant to be resilient to changes, right? So you made a bunch of pledges, and I just want to go, these really are yes or no questions because it'd be useful to know whether or not those pledges have indeed survived. You were asked by the BBC in March 2020 if you could guarantee that under your leadership, Labour commitments to nationalise water, rail, energy and the mail will be in the next Labour manifesto. And you said yes.
Let me take that head on. Last year, when energy prices were going through the roof, we had to think what the response was because people were really worried about their bills for the autumn. And I asked my team to mock up different proposed answers to that specific question in the reality of 2022. I said, include in your analysis taking energy into public ownership. How much would it cost? What would we get for it? And will it lower bills for this autumn? And so they did that for me. And that showed that we would have to spend a lot of public money on public ownership, that because the energy companies were still buying on the international market, it wouldn't lower the price and we wouldn't be able to lower the bills for people into the autumn. And having done that analysis, I took the political choice that it would be better to have an energy price freeze paid for by a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies that made profits they didn't expect to make. And we led the way in the early parts of August. The government then followed in part during the course of the autumn. But, having worked it through, I had to answer the question, would I spend the money available in compensation for shareholders last summer? And I think if I'd done that and come on your programme, you'd have said, are you mad?
Well, sure, but maybe you shouldn't have made the pledge in the first place. Well, the fact is you broke a pledge which you stood for the Labour leadership on. Let's talk about another pledge. You said in the same interview. You said in the same interview.
We're in the same economic position now.
No, but you shouldn't have made a pledge that you were prepared to break. That's the point. You make pledges as promises that are meant to be resilient to changes in the situation. What about tuition fees? This is the point of principle.
Are you telling me that you foresaw COVID? Are you telling me that you foresaw conflict in the Ukraine? Are you telling me you foresaw the kamikaze mini budget of last year? Because you've got incredible foresight if you're telling me that.
I certainly wouldn't pretend to have any such foresight whatsoever, but I'm talking about the nature of pledges. And these are points of principle about nationalisation of utilities. In the same interview, you were asked, what about tuition fees? University tuition fees being scrapped will be in a Starmer manifesto. And you said the answer is yes. What's your answer today?
Well, I do think the tuition fee, the way we do tuition fees at the moment doesn't work. And therefore it's going to have to be changed. We need to look at what the options are available, and we have to look at what's affordable in the economy that we've got at the moment. Huge damage was done to our economy in the autumn of last year with that kamikaze budget. And I think that many members of the public looking at an incoming Labour government want to know and be reassured, which they can be, that we would be a government of sound money that would make sure that any commitments we made when it came to funding or costing were fully accounted in terms of what we're going to pay for, how we're going to get it.
It's perfectly reasonable to change your mind. The point is there's a pattern here of a bunch of pledges made which no longer stand. Let's talk about something else that you changed your mind on, which is Jeremy Corbyn. The independent inquiry that you commissioned by Martin Ford QC didn't really teach us anything new about Jeremy Corbyn himself. It taught us quite a lot about the Labour Party and anti-Semitism. But Corbyn himself is in many ways the same man elected to Parliament in 1983. For years, you worked for him. You supported him. You campaigned across the country for him to lead this country. Yet you've now suspended him from the Parliamentary Labour Party. He hasn't changed, so why have you?
Well, I think it's absolutely clear. The first thing I said as Labour Party leader was that I would tear anti-Semitism out of our party by its roots, that I would change our Labour Party. And I've done that. Our Labour Party now is unrecognisable from 2019. Jeremy was suspended from the whip because of his response to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And I'll just remind you, if I may, that that's the commission that found just over 2 years ago that the Labour Party had acted unlawfully in breach of equality legislation. That is a serious position for any party to find themselves in. Because of the changes that I've brought about in the Labour Party, I'm pleased, but not congratulating myself, that last week the Commission took us out of special measures, said that they were satisfied that we had done sustainable change in relation to anti-Semitism in our party. That's not a moment for celebration, it's a moment for reflection. But in order to get there, I've had to take tough decisions, and I have taken tough decisions because I'm determined that we will change and continue to change our party. I'm determined that we will tackle anti-Semitism wherever it raises its poisonous face. And I will continue in the same vein. So in relation to Jeremy Corbyn, the reason he won't stand as a Labour candidate in the next election is because of the hard work that I've done in our party in relation to anti-Semitism, having been found to be in breach of the law by the Commission, and having now got ourselves into a position where we have made enough progress for the Commission to say that they're satisfied we have a sufficient plan and that we're not in special measures anymore.
But Sir Keir, if he's not fit to represent Labour in Islington North, what does it say about you and your judgment that you spent years advocating for him to be Prime Minister?
Well, look, every single member of the Labour Party campaigned for a Labour government at the next election, just as every member of the Conservative Party campaigned for a Conservative Party election victory. That's what happens at every election. But I'm focused on the future. I reckon in 2019, the electorate gave their verdict. And my strong response to that was to say, if the electorate have rejected you that badly, you don't look at them and say, what were you up to? Weren't you listening? You look at your party and say, we must change. And that's why my first priority as incoming Labour leader was to change our party. The second priority was to expose the government as not fit to govern. And I think the evidence of that is becoming clearer every day. And the third bit, which is what today's all about, is to then say, well, if not the government, why you, an incoming Labour government? And today we're continuing to answer that question, which is because we will have these strong missions, what we're going to achieve, and we will also set out how we're going to achieve them, what a mission-driven government looks like.
Can I just ask one other question? Sadiq Khan has told us that he wants a policy of free school meals for all primary school children. Do you?
Well, look, we'll look at that. And Sadiq Khan's obviously made his position absolutely clear. But you know, I have to make sure that everything that we put before the electorate at the next election, probably next year, is fully costed. So, of course, you know, the fact that we're even having a discussion about the hunger of children at school tells you something about the state of the nation. But look, we'll look at that. We'll talk to Sadiq about how his scheme is running, but nothing will be put forward at the next election unless it's fully funded.
So, Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.